Welcome back, everyone. I'm here today with editor and publisher of Inside the Creator Economy and Future in Review Advisory Board member Jim Louderback, and we are going to be talking about NVIDIA GTC and the future of the chip ecosystem. So, Jim, welcome back. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
I feel like this is kind of our annual podcast conversation about all things technology and creative media and all of the above, but we're kind of making a little bit of a shift this time from what we normally talk about, which is just creator economy in general and different platforms, to very specifically discuss NVIDIA, because you were actually at GTC last week, NVIDIA's big annual developer conference, and it unveiled some exciting new announcements there, including its new Blackwell GPU architecture and the Grace Blackwell superchip. But then this morning, Reuters broke this story that Intel, Qualcomm, and Google, among others, are building an open source software platform to break the dominance of NVIDIA's CUDA software platform. So things are getting spicy in the chip space. And we have this very interesting competitive landscape shaping up between major chip companies, with NVIDIA being labeled as kind of like the next AWS, and others not wanting that to happen as much or wanting to create some competition. So I want to start just by asking you broadly. You were there at GTC. What were your key takeaways from that event?
Well, first of all, yes, I was there. There's two really interesting things that are a little bit aside from what the whole chip wars and all the AI wars and all that we'll talk about. First of all, I live in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and there was the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco last week. And then there was, which is GDC. Then there was GTC, which is NVIDIA's conference in San Jose.
You did attend the right one, right?
I did, yeah, I did, but I knew people with both of them. There was 20,000 people at NVIDIA's, and probably about the same, if not more. And the thing that was wild is it felt like the geek side of the Bay Area is back. You know, the Bay Area has been slammed down so much.
Yeah.
But there was so much good. Even as I was driving down 280 to go to Jensen Huang's keynote at the SAP Center, which is the arena where the Sharks play, 15, 17, whatever thousand of people, going down 280, and over there's one of those airplanes, they fly over the beaches and they have those signs hanging off them like, buy our beer or something like that. This one had an ad for a GPU. So I'm like,
sense.
Okay, the Bay Area is back, baby.
I like that. I like that little textural context.
So there was that. And the reason why I went to GTC, I have friends who work at NVIDIA, and one friend I used to work with I was like, I want a press pass. He's like, I'll get you one. I went there as part of their creator and influencer program. So for the first time, they reached out to LinkedIn creators like myself, YouTubers, and other people, and actually created a whole, program for creators and influencers to bring NVIDIA and what they're doing to a broader audience. I thought that was really interesting too, because they've kind of woken up to the power of YouTube, X, and other places to sort of get their message out. So that was just laying the sort of groundwork of why I was there. I thought both of those things were interesting. But yeah, a lot of people are saying, or at least one person was saying, it's like the Woodstock of AI. It wasn't the Woodstock of AI. It was just as geeky and feeds and speeds as you might imagine. There were a lot of really cool things there, but this was not a this is not like Burning Man for AI. It was very different. It was still a developer conference. It was still really geeky. And as you said, a lot of really, really interesting hardware was launched.
So one of the things that I have noticed about NVIDIA and Jensen, especially in recent years, is the level of care and attention that they put into shaping their launches of things, right? So it's, to your point, it's not like Woodstock. It's much more probably like an Apple event, right? Where they're very specific about who they're bringing in, how they're explaining things. It's much nerdier than an Apple event, but it is also very targeted and tailored and curated in a very careful way. Do you think that's an accurate observation?
So I was there at the SAP Center. I was sitting down on the ice. It wasn't ice. It was covered up. But on the ice, probably right about center line.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, look, first of all, Jensen was the only one on stage for the whole event. 2 hours. Okay, he brought some robots up. But for 2 hours, he didn't bring up a partner. He did a hi hello to Michael Dell in the audience, but he did not bring Michael Dell up to talk about what he was doing. Mm-hmm. I found it really interesting that it was 100% Jensen. And that was a little weird. The other thing is, it
For
it
two
felt like he
hours.
had what's that?
For 2 hours.
For 2 hours speaking
Yeah,
and
that's a
rolling
long,
stuff out.
and for those who are not familiar with events, that is a long time for any one individual to speak.
Yeah, holding an audience for 2 hours. He made a joke. It's like there's like Taylor Swift or whatever. It's like he's not Taylor Swift. They ran a
First of
couple
all,
of
no
clips.
outfit changes.
Yeah, no outfit. That's right. Well, he may have changed black leather jackets,
Yeah.
but no one would know. But no, they had a couple of videos they showed, which were really cool, of course. But it was just him. The other thing is, it felt like it was rehearsed, but some of the jokes were a little flat, and he sort of joked about, not rehearsing or this or that, although, he did. So it felt a little off.
Huh.
And then I was like thinking, that was a little weird. I haven't seen Jensen speak for 12 or 15 years because, back when I was running PC Magazine, I would go to those things all the time. But then I ran into your dad on the show floor. I was doing some video about the show floor, which I'm going to post this week, and he was running off to a meeting. And we talked about it a little bit, and he told me something I did not know. He asked me, do you know how many direct reports Jensen has? And I'm like, I don't know, but based on the way you put that question out, it's either 0 or 75. And he's like, 75. He has so many direct reports, and you could see it. And it opened up my eyes to the fact that he must be an incredible micromanager. Nobody else gets on stage with him, and he's got 75 freaking direct reports.
So what does that tell you about NVIDIA's culture?
It's got to be the culture of Jensen, right? And so in that, it's probably very Apple-like, right? Steve Jobs was the heart and soul of Apple. I do feel like Jensen, because of that, probably is the heart and soul of NVIDIA. And you heard that. I mean, talking to the NVIDIA employees, there was a lot of Jensen this and Jensen that. And didn't get a sense that although they had a lot of other people there, a lot of other people on stage and talking through things, but it still felt like we're just going to talk more about what Jensen talked about rather than laying out our own pieces of the vision.
Mm-hmm. So of those pieces, what to you were most interesting?
A couple different things. One, and I know you talked about this at Fire with the Grok folks, but it's expensive to build one of these. Jensen called it an AI factory, and was very much like, just like factories of old, where you build a big factory and things would go in and things would come out. These racks and racks and racks and racks and racks of servers and 8,000 GPUs and whatever that are into these modern day AI factories where data goes in and knowledge comes out or whatever. I'm like, these things are freaking expensive. We're talking, it's probably 100 million to start. And then up, 400, 500 million, $1 billion to be able to create an AI factory that will allow you to train some of these comprehensive LLMs. And so, boy, it's expensive. And boy, NVIDIA is becoming a real enterprise hardware company.
So other than the AI ecosystem in general, who are the kinds of companies that would be actually paying that much?
Well, it's Google, it's OpenAI. I mean, OpenAI is very clear that he delivered the first one of his, little machines for this to OpenAI by hand, and it's now grown into, these 8,000 servers or 8,000 chips or whatever. So it's that. He's talked about SAP. He talked about Snowflake. He talked about companies like that are using it to build models. But the table stakes to get into it, to me, was really, really interesting. And then, of course, we saw at the end of the week things like the CEO of Stability and a couple of his top developers leaving, saying that they needed to build more customized models. And you saw Inflection, which was Reid Hoffman's AI company, essentially selling itself to Microsoft. So I think that this is going to be a case of, particularly when it comes to broad general purpose LLMs, the rich are going to get richer, but only the rich are going to be able to afford the hardware, at least for now, to be able to train these huge models.
Right. And that kind of brings us back to the conversation that we were starting to have at the beginning of this about seeing Intel and Qualcomm popping up this new open source ecosystem for developers. Now, I'm curious, you talked a little bit about some of the jokes falling flat, maybe this kind of cult of Jensen. What did you get a sense from developers at the conference? Like, what kind of underground rumblings did you hear from them?
Most of the people I talked to and saw at the conference were all very optimistic. And so I don't think that I did not sense any sort of undercurrent of fear. There's the floor is breaking and we're holding on.
I'm not asking you to throw anyone under the bus from that perspective. I'm just curious because there's always what you hear on stage, and then there's what you hear in the audience, and those are two very different things often. So I'm curious if there was a different narrative going on the ground than on stage.
I think some of what I heard, though, and in some of the Q&As I were in, were mostly, some of the stuff that was interesting is like, well, you can't even make enough of these GPUs now. How are you going to make enough Blackwells and Hoppers to support the grand plans that you have? So I thought that was really interesting. I attended a number of panels. One in particular was, the Sphere in Las Vegas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they came and did a technical presentation about the data and the throughput and the AI and everything that they're doing there. They're using a lot of NVIDIA hardware, and what they're doing at the Sphere wouldn't have been possible without what NVIDIA is doing. Another company came in that does experiential stuff, and they talked about digital twinning some of their experiential stuff so that they could have a complete digital version of it, and the physical experiential thing that they may do, which may be there for a week, it may be there for a year, but they're able to completely mimic them so they can make changes in a completely digital version of it and have it update automatically once they like it, the physical version. So that whole concept of digital twinning was something that I thought was really interesting, even on a factory, being able to create a digital twin of a factory so that if you wanted to, say, see what's going on or have the robots change things around or find out, you could do it all digitally before actually implementing the factory. And I found that fascinating, but I don't have enough of a background in building factories to know whether that's a real important thing. But I do think the whole concept of creating complete virtual versions of things in the real world and using them to model, develop, design, and then in real time manage is fascinating. And that's something that NVIDIA launched and talked a lot about. I had a joke with myself during Jensen's keynote. And I was talking to somebody, I think from The Economist or something next to me. I was like, tell you what, here's our next drinking game. Every time Jensen says digital twin, we all have to take a shot. Well, if that had happened, they would have to pour us off the ice. But because there was digital twins everywhere for a while.
I think digital twins are very interesting.
I do too.
I mean, in my opinion, they're the most interesting part of this whole ecosystem, right? Because they are the point of all of the CUDA platform and Omniverse are exciting because of digital twins.
I agree 100%. I think it's really, really cool. And I just imagine, I used to run VidCon, which is this huge, 75,000 person event in Anaheim, where we would build the city in a week and then tear it down in an hour. Being able to do that all digitally and being able to control it and being able to see where people were and see where they're flowing and who's everywhere, all completely twinned out, would be amazing. Now, I will say that we also ran VidCon on a knife edge of profitability. We couldn't afford it, but hopefully as technology, as it always does, gets cheaper and more affordable and easier to implement, we'll be able to do that. The other thing, though, that wasn't the only thing that I thought was really interesting. The other thing was they also really leaned into robotics there. So he talked at the end about this thing called Groot. I think it's Groot, which was this model that they put together to help. I guess it ties into digital twinning too, but help robots create a digital version of the world in their brain,
right? Yeah,
so that they could do all sorts of different things there. And so I really liked what he was talking about there. Yeah, Groot, Groot. And so that he called it like the soul of NVIDIA. And even at the end of the keynote, he brought out some of they're really puppet robots from Disney, but behind him, he had all these humanoid robots, which given where I was sitting, I thought they were on the screen, but they were actually real. You couldn't really tell. But he said, look, everything that moves will be a robot. Mm-hmm. And the digital twin platform is going to be the operating system of robotics. And there were a fair bit of robots on the floor, on the convention center floor there as well, including a couple of the Boston Dynamics little dogs running around that I thought were cool. And I asked your dad, he said he was scared of them. But he's like, I don't want to see one of those coming after me in a battlefield. I'm like, yeah, I get it.
Well, yeah, that's happening, I believe, already. Maybe not with the Boston Dynamics, but with some other robots out there. So one of the things that I'm curious, so Okay, so let's start with robotics. You just talked about a lot of things there, so I'm kind of
Sorry.
trying to. No, you're
There's
you're
a lot to
good.
unpack.
Jim is ready to go. One of the things that I think part of the reason I brought up, not to go back to the same thing over again, but part of the reason that I brought up this question at the beginning about this open source platform that's in development is because I actually think that NVIDIA I see very little chance of NVIDIA being disrupted and building out this kind of locked in Omniverse CUDA platform, right? Because
Yeah.
they have such domination of the chip market. Everyone needs to be on their platform. They were first movers. It's just very difficult to see anything coming up and undoing what they've already done. And on top of that, I wrote about the Omniverse about a year ago, saying it was like, I think the most interesting thing that NVIDIA is doing because it's like the next generation of AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So forget LLMs, like in the next version of AI, when you can actually create all of these digital models of everything that's happening in the world and adjust policies and ideas and technical frameworks and test those things ahead of time and before deploying them, just creates this like amazing, truly revolutionary potential future. And when you integrate the robotics piece into it, you're like, okay, you have all of these different pieces of this future ecosystem, and NVIDIA is already building all of them so much farther ahead of all of these other companies that it's just very tough to imagine that disruption kind of coming from behind working. That doesn't mean it couldn't, but I think part of the cult of Jensen that works so well is his ability to hold all of these different parts of the vision for the company and drive everyone in that direction with that continued commitment to excellence and improvement.
Yeah, I think you're going to run up against the nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, right?
Right.
I think we're going to run to the nobody ever got fired for buying NVIDIA. A couple of things I will say that, one, that there's so much vendor lock-in that they're working on, very much reminds me of IBM or Microsoft in their heyday. So you're talking a lot about their NIMs, and NIMs are, I can't remember what NIM says, but it's basically a, smaller self-contained LLM that may be very purpose-driven that you can build with their stuff, and kind of thinks about that world where you've got a top level chatbot that is sitting at the top and you ask it a question or whatever, and that it says, well, there's this middleware layer where we're going to need a really high-end LLM, ChatGPT 4 or 5 or something like that for part of this query. We're going to go down there and get it. But then maybe there's a little data or something else we need that's contained in some less expensive, smaller, very single purpose or narrow LLM that could be contained in one of these NIMs as well that, maybe a data company has, or maybe maybe the government has because that's where all their traffic data is, or maybe that's where the weather data is. And so that this middleware and the top level controller will route queries to different ones of these NIMs and gather different information that's smart enough to bring it together and not just, summarize it and regurgitate it, but maybe also, take action on it and be able to make inferences on it. So we get to that world. The interesting thing is that whole thing I just talked about, and the NIMs and the top level and the middleware, all controlled by NVIDIA. And it sounds very much, pattern matching, 100% the patterns I see there are like the 3270 IBM mainframe architecture, where everything was the IBM infrastructure. And, that kind of led to a little bit of a monopolistic thing at one point. So who knows? I don't know if we're going to get there. But what I see, well, we'll stop there. But I do think that's why what Google and Qualcomm, et cetera, are doing is very interesting.
It basically, I think what they're doing is by making the best product in the space and making it easy to use and being the first mover and having that first mover advantage, it's pretty much an avenue for owning everything.
But so I'll take the other
And
side of
it, to go, well, sorry, just to go
keep
into
going, and then
your aside there. Having seen, some of the DOJ case coming up against Apple this week for similar behavior, it wasn't a particularly strong case that they made. I don't think, my opinion. Focusing on iMessage as a, like, you know, just not as interesting as it would have been if they'd put a lot more effort and thought into the app ecosystem, I think.
Yes,
So
if they focus on the store for sure.
Exactly.
100%.
So I'm not seeing a lot of like particularly strong pushback coming from a federal regulation standpoint either. And I guess where I'm going with this is I don't see a stop. You know, everyone's asking like, is the stock too high? Is it too much? I don't really see a stopping point in the near future. You know what I mean? Like,
totally get it. I'm not a stock analyst, so I don't know how their valuation, but I do think that they own a market now that they can continue to own for a while. But I will, talk about a couple of things. First of all, if they own the top level and they own the chips and the hardware, and everybody has to build on their platform, even these smaller single-purpose LLMs, that becomes a very monopolistic environment. We'll see where that goes. But I also think, we're reaching a bit of a ceiling for chip design, right? We're down to 3 nanometers. This is the first time I can remember where the follow-on chip for a processor, a CPU creation company that makes chips, was like twice as big as the chip that came before it. You look at Hopper and it's big. And then you look at Blackwell and it's like twice as big. And that's because they took 2 chips and glommed them together and have, one shared memory space, et cetera, whatever. But it was the first time I'm like, wow, chips aren't getting smaller, they're getting bigger. And that's because we're coming up with ways to build chips because we're up against the nanometer problem.
Yeah.
So I wonder if the inexorable cost of chip making technology and other things continue to drop. Does that mean that it'll be easier for AMD or Grok or whoever to come in and create things at a wildly less expensive price and disrupt the bottom of the market first and then take that up into the enterprises? That's kind of what AMD did, right?
Yeah. Well, Jim, I look forward to watching this with you over the coming years.
We will see what happens. Definitely.
Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to another conversation in the future.
Thanks, Barrett.
Thank you.